this week's program. We've got some good news and some bad news all mixed in together on the land this week. We're also going to be meeting some of the finalists for the Young Farmer of the Year, and we'll be talking about how to preserve your machinery to make sure that it's still going to be working in the spring. But in just a moment, it's finance. Kerry, the herd scheme's announced in a new year.
Yeah, IRD have released the values just recently to value end-of-year livestock. No real surprise in terms of what the values were. You know, your dairy cattle and your sheep are down sort of 8 to 28%, which reflects where the market is because of what they're getting in terms of payout and the drought. The one that did sort of catch a couple of people out is your beef cattle. They're up about an average of 17%. So that was a wee bit of surprise to some of our farmers that we've talked to. One little trick that IRD have done is that the dairy cattle, they used to separate out the Jerseys and the Friesians,
Yep.
and they had different values. Nowadays they've actually just brought them together, so they've all got one value. So for farmers it doesn't mean a lot, but for accountants it makes our job far easier.
Well, it would, because otherwise you're not going to go out into the paddock and go, which one's a Jersey?
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And farmers weren't sort of determining exactly what numbers were what. So now they can just say, I've got so many dairy cattle and the ages, and we can just go ahead and use the one value irrespective of what breed they are.
Can you explain why we need to have the herd scheme and what those figures mean?
Basically, livestock is like your closing stock or your inventory. At the end of the year, you've got to put a value on them. Because a lot of them are reared on farm, and farmers don't sit down and work out exactly what it costs to produce an animal, IRD release these values so you can go ahead and say, right, this is what I think, this is what your cattle's worth, or your sheep, etc., goats and all those sort of things, and you put it in your books and that gives you an inventory value to work out your final profit. So
this isn't equating to what you'll get in a sales yard, it's basically across the board.
Well, the herd scheme's sort of your average market value, so in theory what you value them at is sort of pretty close to what you'd get if you sent them off to the sales yard. There's another method of valuation which is totally different, but this is the one that most farmers use and a lot of accountants use because it is the simpler one to actually use.
And in their mix somewhere there's how many that have died and...
Yes, yeah, you've got to put down the deaths and the natural increase and how many you killed and how many you ate yourself and that sort of thing. You've got to make allowances of all those and bring those in.
So I suppose, you know, you look at something and you say, well, we put 1,000 cows up onto the hill and 997 came back. Because you're never going to find them in the scrub.
No, exactly. And in theory, you're supposed to be able to say where they are. The idea would be that you'd say, well, those three have died.
Or they're in the neighbour's place.
Well, there's that possibility as well. But you've got to just sort of count them up and make sure you get pretty close.
Sounds good. No, thank you for that. There are two schemes still?
Yeah, there's actually five.
Five.
But the two that are most commonly used are the herd and then the national standard cost. And those values came out about January this year for that scheme.
They're very different?
Yes, your herd does it on market value and the national standard cost does it on what they think it actually costs you to produce an animal and to grow it to a certain age.
So what's the preference?
Depends on the farm and, and what your plan is.
That's even better than John Key saying something.
Because it does come down to if you've got capital stock, trading stock, whether you're going to be long-term farming, short-term, there's a whole pile of things that come into it.
Okay, so in other words, talk to your chartered accountant.
You've got to talk to the accountant and keep them updated on what your plans are, because if you're in the herd scheme, you're in it for, you've got at least 2 years notice to get out of it. So you've got to pre-plan if you're in it and want to get out.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Now, let's talk about the drought, because it is still there. I mean, New Zealand's greening up, but there's no length to anything. Yeah,
no, there's quite a few that are still badly affected. I was talking to a couple this week, and they're heavily destocking and also sending their hoggets off for grazing elsewhere around the country. So they're facing costs for that, but then they've also got this extra income because they're now selling off capital stock. So they need to start thinking about what the tax implications are, because it's stock that they normally have money for. So they're going to end up with a higher tax bill potentially. So end of year tax, plus they'll need to have provisional tax for next year. So there's a few things that come into it.
So how do you get around that? Because yeah, you're dead right. I mean, you've sold a whole lot of stock, you've got massive amount of income, but you can't get any return from those.
Yeah, so if you've got all the stock that you sold that you wouldn't normally, you have got an option of using the income equalisation scheme, where basically you can tip some money into it and that moves income from one year to the next. Now IRD, because it's a drought, have sort of relaxed the rules around it, but you do actually have to plan what you're going to do as to when you put it in and when you take it out. There's all sorts of things you've got to do to let IRD know, and there's some quite big criteria around it. So if you're looking at, wanting to defer your income from this capital stock that you sold, it is a case of talking to the accountant and working out whether it's even going to work for you.
Do you have a sort of a rule of thumb saying, well, how much do you put away for provisional tax next year? I mean, is there a formula?
There's a formula under the legislation, so they say whatever your profit is this year plus 5 or 10%, depends on whether your tax return's filed. If you're in a drought, you don't want to be putting that money aside. You've got other things you want to use it for. So that's where you've got to sit down and start planning and budgeting. And if you're selling your capital stock, you've actually got to think about what happens when the farm comes back up to full production, and you need to go out and buy more capital stock. You've got to make sure you've got those funds available.
And guess what the prices are going to be when everybody's looking for stock?
Exactly, and that's why it's the case now, starting to budget for it, putting money aside, and just thinking ahead.
Kerry, there's some horrendous stories coming out about some farmers losing 100,000 this year because literally the returns are down.
Yep.
What are their options? I mean, if the banks are going to have to say at some point, we can't see how you're going to pay the interest.
Yeah, the banks haven't got to that point yet. They're trying to work with people. If it really is severe, they probably could talk about looking at selling up, or
would that advise you to, rather than they selling you up?
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, they sell you up, you're not going to get what you're worth, because everyone's going to see it as a bit of a fire sale and hopefully get a cheap deal. Whereas if you take it to the market yourself, hopefully you can at least maintain some value. But
human nature's not nice, is it? When it comes to farming?
No. But the banks have been pretty helpful. They know that this is cyclical, so they are trying to work with farmers and hang in there with them. But they have got some ratios in terms of debt and that they've got to work with. And if you're starting to get really close to the edge, that's when it's going to become pretty serious for you.
First thing that I have to think of is the ostrich head in the sand stuff.
Yes, the worst thing you can do, you've got to front up to it. You know, if you're in a drought, just say, yep, I'm in, who do I need to talk to? So you give your banker a call, because obviously they're making sure the money flows, and talk to your accountant, because we need to know what you're up to, what you're doing in terms of income. No point coming in the year and say, oh look, I sold all the stock, here's all my money, what do I do with it? Because all we're going to turn and say was, look, you should have told us earlier, we might have been able to save your tax, it's a bit late now.
So there are things that you can do?
There are some options, and we can sort of move things around and look at how we sort of reduce that tax bill, but it's got to be in early.
There's a large percentage of people who really are up against the wall. I mean, and
yes.
They don't. Chocolate biscuits is something you see in an old magazine because you're not buying new ones.
Yeah, well, I was talking to a farmer yesterday, and he's considering actually walking off the farm. He said it's in his best interest to sell all the stock, close the gate, and go and do something else for a while, and hope that the drought breaks and he can come back to it. He's lucky because he's got no debt, but it's pretty serious when he
has no debt.
Yeah, he's been working very hard to get it down, and we put some strategies in place. He's got to that point now, and he thinks, rather than going and borrow the money, he might be better just to keep paying the rates, the insurance on the buildings, etc., and just walk off the farm and hopefully
go and get a job digging up the streets in Christchurch.
Yep. He's looking for other income elsewhere that will give him a bit of a return. At the farm, at the moment, the farm's doing nothing. His hay sale was hay bales. He hasn't got any of them left. Last year he got, I think, 200 off a paddock. He got 40 this year. So he said, why bother?
Ooh. But he had no debt.
He's got no debt because we've been working on it over the last 5 years to get him to that point. He's made some sacrifices to get there. There's probably some things he could have done in terms of his homestead, etc. But he's like, no, I want to get to the point that if it becomes to the crunch where I need to have no debt, I'm there, and the drought's the one that's...
Are they dry land?
Yes, no irrigation.
And that's the other thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the next thing we want to be looking at is irrigation, and the banks are starting to lend on that.
They are?
Yes.
Good. Kerry, thank you. There was a lot of good and bad news in that one, yes. I can tell you. Now, the Young Farmers of the Year, the national contest, is being held, I think it's very soon actually, it's in June, and we met the finalists. Now, what we've done is we've done an interview with the 7 finalists, and you're going to see the interviews, warts and all. We have done nothing to make them a bit dollied up or to cover up any mistakes. So as I said, it's the Young Farmers finalists, and it's warts and all. James, what's your background? What, are you farming or what are you doing?
Oh, we're part-time farmers in Culverden, which has been home for forever, really. So we've got some stud Corriedale sheep there, and I work mostly as a farm environment consultant and do some writing for Countrywide magazine. Yeah.
So Culverden's become dairying very much, isn't it?
It has. We've certainly got the last Corriedales in Culverden, no doubt about that. Or on the basin anyway, last stud. But we have, the dairying thing's helped us stay there too in a way. The family farm's been leased for a long time for dairy support. Without that industry there, we'd probably be struggling to stay there, to be honest, the way returns have been for the last 10 years or so. So it's meant there's a farm sitting there still in the family and an opportunity if we can make it work for the next generation.
Corriedales, they're an amazing breed, especially in a drought.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of people who would generally be considered critics of the breed have had to admit that this year's been a year for corries. A bit of a shame that it takes a year like this to show some benefits of the breed, but they've certainly been good for people who have got them at the moment as opposed to something with a huge appetite.
And of course mid-micron, it was written off from the Kinsey report as holding its own now.
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, it's still hard to compare a couple of extra dollars a kilo to an extra lamb, but if we can lift lambing percentage as well, which a lot of the remaining breeders have, and we can get a good premium for wool through smart wool contracts or something like that, because we are finding the breed up, then I think there's a competitive option there for some people. Yeah.
Now the contest, why would you enter it?
It's something we entered, first time we entered it was actually at high school. We were just 18 and it got us a reasonably interesting test for a Saturday and a day out of the boarding hostel. But after that, a few years off before we got the Young Farmers Club going at home again in Huranui. And ever since then, we've all encouraged each other to have a go, either there or in Waimak, depending who's hosting the North Canterbury one that year. And it's just something, every time I've done it, I've learned something. It's a really good way of testing ourselves, usually pretty stressful, and certainly stressful to have got to this level, but always rewarding by the end of it.
James, the dairy industry has taken a hiding. What has to happen to get it out of the blues?
Yeah, the dairying one's an interesting question at the moment. I think a lot of people possibly plan for the rainy day, and we're seeing that at the moment with the drought on all farm types. People who have farmed through a difficult time before, or who have farmed for when the difficult time might happen, will come through the other side. I mean, farmers are incredibly resilient. That's not specific to any particular sector, that's the whole group. You have to be, and you have to enjoy what you're doing to keep going. And I think anyone that's facing it at the moment, either through difficult returns, which is not just confined to dairying, or through climatic conditions, which are tough for everyone, anyone that can get through that's going to be stronger at the other end.
And you'll be meeting the other 6 finalists here on the Land. After the break, it's cropping with Dennis Carter.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
I think it's all working well, Jack.
My thoughts exactly.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
This is exactly what you need.
I think that'll do the trick.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
It's all looking good. Did you bring the sauce?
I can't think of everything.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
For real ideas and real solutions, just think water.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
Dennis, it's been an Indian summer. What's aphid been doing as far as numbers are concerned?
Well, the Indian summer is continuing, Rob, and as most farmers know, that it's rain and serious wind that affect aphid. rather than so much the snow and the frost, because they can live underneath that. But because it's been an Indian summer, the aphid have persisted, and particularly cereal aphid has built up to large numbers. And at Lincoln there's an aphid trap which traps the aphid from the ear to give us a bit of an indication of the potential for the aphid infecting barley yellow dwarf virus in the wheat crops. And last week, there was, or from the week of the 6th through to the 10th, 66 aphid were trapped that were cereal aphid, and the 12-year average is 30. So we're well above that, and warning signs that there could be an overwintering population that will infect wheat crops quite badly. 2005 was a very bad season, and it's a lot higher at this point than it was in 2005. So farmers that have got wheat up that hasn't been protected by insecticide, they'd better get out there and have some jolly good looks around their crops to see what they've got, and wipe that population out. Because
so we need to spray right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Take that population out, because it can overwinter and build up in the spring just dramatically. It's not an expensive exercise to kill those aphid, but one that will pay large rewards looking at the numbers that are in the traps at this stage.
You won't see the redness of the leaf yet because it's too early for that?
Yes, that's right. Yes, you'll see that a little bit later, after the aphids have been feeding and injected their virus into the plant. Then the plant exudes that redness, and then later on sort of yellow colour, and really it just
kills it off.
Kills it off. It's just useless. It just large patches within the paddock, not the whole paddock, because aphid tend to come over a fence and into a sheltered area and drop into a spot. But as we know, they can build up dramatically in the spring, and they will be carrying the virus with them. Not every aphid does, but the ones that are there now probably will be carrying that virus.
Now, speaking of barley, the malt price is out for the first contracts?
Yes, Malt Europe are putting out a contract to see how the pulse of the farmers is going. I must say it's a little bit disappointing at this stage. It's 13% below last year's price. And most farmers I've talked to are not really ready to sign. They want about the same area as last year, and last year they got the barley they wanted because of the very, very wet autumn, and a lot of wheat couldn't be planted, clover couldn't get in, grass seed couldn't get in even because it was just so wet people couldn't get onto the land. That meant there was a lot of land available in the spring for planting barley, so they got their area. I'm suggesting at the moment that they're probably $10 to $15 a tonne below where farmers are prepared to settle, and I don't know any farmer that's going to sign that first contract at $3.85, or if you're out of zone, $3.91 for the extra cartage. It's last year about $4.35, so we don't like going backwards.
No, absolutely right.
And malting barley is not a commodity. It's becoming very much a specialist thing where...
Well, it's different beers and things.
Different beers, different barleys, and it's just not something you can instantly buy on the world market and ship in because the New Zealand growers won't grow it. So don't think of it as a commodity. It's getting more and more specialist every day.
Niche. Now, speaking of smoke coming out of people's ears, ECAN.
Yes, well, ECAN have released their Variation 1 to the farm and water and nutrient management plan that they've put out, and it hasn't been accepted with great joy. It is law at this stage. A lot of it's going to be implemented in January 2017, so supposedly we've got 18 months to absorb it, but there's no opportunity to challenge that unless it is within the first 15 days on a point of law. So those independent commissioners who have looked at how we will farm or the rules that they'll put in place in the future, they cannot be questioned on their science they used or the decisions they make. They may have written some answers for ECAN on certain subjects, but if, for instance, a phosphate runoff area that they've identified is a problem, the soil science or the science that they've used behind that and the reasoning why those farms are in that zone, they cannot be questioned on that. And I must say, I've looked at some of those zones, and our farm and a lot of our neighbours are in that phosphate runoff area. We will have to apply for a consent to continue farming, just what we're doing now.
So let me get this right. You have to get a consent to continue. What if you don't get the consent? Is it...
Well, I imagine you'll be non-compliant, and you'll be audited, and you'll be made to do, well, certainly environmental farm plans will be part of the whole thing, and they will be audited, and I imagine they could stop you farming if you continue to infringe. But certainly, the straight from the pamphlet, they're saying you need a consent to farm if your farm's over 10 hectares and your nitrogen loss is more than 15 kilograms per hectare per year.
And how do they measure that?
They have certain soil tests done, and soil types as well. You know, some soils with clay and that sort of thing, they are quite nitrogen retentive, so they don't have the, like shingle and so forth, underneath the soil. The nitrogen will dissipate into the water. So there's all sorts of ways. Or if you're within the cultural landscape values management area, now that is a co-management program with Ngātahu and ECAN, and there's 12 streams that go into Lake Ellesmere that are in that area, as well as a lot of farms around the edge of the lake, and they are looking at 20 metres either side of those 12 streams will be part of the cultural area. So those sorts of areas and around the edge of the lake, they're going to be subject to special cultural values and things you can and can't do, even tougher than the ones outside that area. Also within a phosphate sediment risk area, and that's the one that we're in. But we believe, in talking to a few people at Foundation for Arable Research, for instance, some of that science is quite contestable, but we're not going to have an opportunity to contest it.
So farming for future will not be as farming as we know it.
Well, you know, we've talked earlier about some of the restrictions and some of the things that are going on, and my son was at the meeting where this was presented to us, and he said, when are they putting in the next gas chamber?
Ooh,
that was the feeling.
That was the feeling. Thank you. In just a moment we'll be talking machinery and how to get at through the winter. James, winter, so what do we need to do as far as machinery is concerned?
Yeah, well, I think, Rob, the first thing is obviously get onto things early, because we all think there's plenty of time between the end of harvest and the start of the next, or maybe the feed-out season. But yeah, it creeps around pretty fast, so I think, yeah, get onto things early, get things booked in, and then we can get on to getting things sorted for the next season for everyone.
I guess it's remembering all those noises that you heard during the season.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite common for a lot of people to get to the next harvest and have an issue that may be just minor but getting worse. To say, oh, I wish I had remembered that from last year. So I think, you know, it's important to just note things down, maybe keep a little book in the cab or the tractor or the harvester, just so you can remember when it comes to the winter servicing, and tell the service people to make sure they have a wee look at whatever it may be.
Now, rust is a major enemy.
Definitely, yeah. I think as long as you can keep things shined up, whether it's a baler, I mean, that's ejecting the last bales out of the chamber, cleaning all the grass and things out of the pickup, and same with the combine harvester, blowing the machine down, just making sure it's nice and clean, so it makes sure that not everything gets all rusty, and keeping things oiled and just spraying a bit of oil on the pickup and the on the front of the header, so just oiling it down and keeping it clean is an important thing.
And of course rodents are a major problem.
Definitely, yeah, especially in things with electrics. A lot of rodents love to get their teeth into the wires, so yeah, keeping the machines blown down straight after harvest eliminates the risk of having those sorts of issues, electrical issues. So.
Now, what about the modern motor? Do we need to drain the water in, out, or fill the tank or anything?
Yeah, well, obviously servicing of the engine and the rest of the gearbox and components are important. There has been arguments both ways, but I think, you know, it is good to get fresh oil into the engine, so then it's sitting with fresh oil in it over the season, over the winter. So when you come to harvest, it's all nice fresh oil. rather than having sulphurs and things in the oil over the winter period. So, you know, it is a great thing to, get things done early and get its servicing done. So.
And what about the coolants?
Yeah, coolant's obviously important. So in the service schedule of the machines, every machine will have an operator's manual, so it tells you there what to do. So that's an important thing to have a look at. So for New Zealand, mainly, we do the things yearly. So hours sometimes can take longer than just one harvest to do the hours. So you're doing things yearly, just making sure everything's ready to go is important.
Of course, early spring, you've got birds and birds' nests.
Exactly, yeah. Every year it comes around, seems to change different areas every year. People have issues, so yeah, certainly birds' nests are a real concern. So just before you're starting your machines up, hop up and have a look around the turbocharger and the hot components of the engine and make sure there's no nests and things in there.
Now, a lot of this stuff can be done by the farmer or the operator, can't it?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So I mean, just this basic stuff is easily done by the operator or the farmer. So yeah, get that done, and then it, like I said before, it actually makes it easy for our service guys to come out and make sure things are right, because when things are covered in straw and it's a lot harder to see what's going on. And so if you can get things cleaned down, and then gives us a better chance to see what's wrong or what's right. Yeah.
Combine harvesters and such, they should be serviced by a proper service person.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah. No, we have a combine, a service plan for combine owners, and yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of things that you learn. That new issues come along that our service technicians find out, and so they can rectify those little things or have a little fix for certain bits and pieces that maybe you might not know about just being an owner. So. Prevention
rather than cure.
Yes, exactly. Hey, look, there's nothing worse than having breakdowns in the harvest. Would be not telling the truth if we said we didn't have breakdowns, but we can certainly prevent them if you get in and get things done in the winter. So.
In a combine, it's basically the same as a baler?
Yeah, definitely. Hay baler's no different, because there's a lot of moving parts on a hay baler, and yeah, it's an important part. And also, I guess a big part of what we do is silage, feed-out wagons, those sorts of things. I mean, they're as important as a combine harvester or a baler. The other end of the scale, because you're feeding out the product, but if something goes wrong with a feed-out wagon, there's a lot of hungry mouths that are wanting to be fed. So
a lot of noise.
Yeah, a lot of noise. Yeah, not that happy. So yeah, it's just as important. So we do a lot of winter servicing. Just ring one of the branches and they'll book you in for a winter service on your silage wagon, or sorry, pre-winter service for a silage wagon. So I guess at different periods of the year for those. So
basically, the message is spend time now and really look after your machinery.
Definitely. I mean, it's a huge investment that people have putting into these machines, so it doesn't take a lot. It might only take 2 or 3 hours to blow the machine down, get someone to give you a hand and give them the dusty jobs, but yeah, you can save a lot of time, a lot of hassles through the stressful parts of the year. So.
Pretty good advice, really, when you think how valuable your machinery is. After the break, we'll have more for you on the land.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
I think it's all working well, Jack.
My thoughts exactly.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
This is exactly what you need.
I think that'll do the trick.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
It's all looking good. Did you bring the sauce?
I can't think of everything.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
For real ideas and real solutions, just think water.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. and you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
What's your operation? What do you do for a living?
I work for Baker & Associates. It's a sheep and beef consultancy firm in Masterton. And my wife and I also run a sheep and beef business just east of Masterton.
So, two professions all in one. How do you get the time to do both those?
I've got a very capable wife. She runs the day-to-day stuff on the farm, and yeah, I just help out in the big jobs and the weekends.
And that will also obviously help with the cash flow and being able to afford chocolate biscuits at morning tea time.
Yeah, it is good for cash flow. It offsets the sort of seasonal business of farming. But also, I think the bigger advantage of having the two roles is as a consultant, I get to see a whole lot of different farms, so I get to steal ideas off other people, and it helps our farm business.
So tell me a bit about the farm business. How big is it?
We're about 6,000 stock units across 3 properties, just east of Masterton. Sheep and beef, so mainly breeding ewes, finishing lambs, and then some cattle as well, just to complement that.
Sheep still fashionable, and they will come back, won't they?
Oh, I think if you look historically, sheep prices aren't too bad. They're certainly down a bit on what they were last year or a few years ago, but historically we're still at a pretty good level. There's still plenty of money to be made in sheep farming, so no, we're pretty happy at the moment.
And of course the lamb is looking pretty solid.
Yeah, lamb's going well. Got a bit dry through the summer, so the prices dropped away a bit, but we had a good contract signed, so no, we've been pretty happy this year. Not too much to complain about. Touch wood, I suppose. You never want to speak too soon in farming.
No, you never do. Young farmers, why'd you get into it, and then the big contest, of course?
I got into the Young Farmers contest, I like competition really, and it was a way of comparing yourself to your peers. I think the best thing I get out of the contest is it forces you to learn about things you might otherwise not bother learning about, so you're just broadening your knowledge base a bit. The contest coming up, this is my 2nd year in it. I don't get another year after this. Apparently I'm not a young farmer anymore. I don't know what that means, but
it means you're sort of getting to the end of being young.
That's a bit depressing, isn't it? So as I said, my last year, I'll give it a good crack this year and see how we get on.
What's the silver bullet that's needed to fix the dairy industry at the moment?
I don't think there's a silver bullet needed, really. Farming is cyclical. I haven't been in the industry that long, but I've already come to realise that prices will go up and prices will go down. Dairying's probably at the bottom of a cycle, let's hope, at the moment, and no doubt it'll go back up at some stage. Sheep and beef might be somewhere near the top of the cycle, and I'm under no illusions that it's going to stay there forever, so I wouldn't panic too much. It's cyclical, it'll rebound, it always does.
Nick, vaccines, when and when?
Yeah, it's quite a technical problem, a technical thing to talk about, Rob, and we'll talk a wee bit about clostridial vaccines today, because it's coming time. We've got the next big thing on the forecast is lambing, really. So we need to be talking and thinking about that. So clostridial vaccines, there's a couple of products that names will come to mind, and we'll talk about 5-in-1 vaccination and also lamb vaccination. And there's some very important differences between the two that people need to understand. And we'll also talk maybe a little bit about the different protocols and how and when to use these products. So clostridial vaccines protect against a lot of the sudden death type diseases, and include diseases such as pulpy kidney, tetanus are the big two, but also malignant edema and the blood poisoning type diseases. Yep. So when we're talking about vaccines on the whole, we're inducing an animal to produce immunity, and a great part of that immunity is derived from antibody production. Not the whole picture, but it's easier just to talk about antibodies at the moment. So what has to happen initially in a vaccine course, particularly with clostridial vaccines, is an animal initially has to be exposed at least twice to get a good antibody response or immune response. The first vaccine that's given, the first shot, that will prime the animal to produce immunity, and the second shot will induce that immunity. And then going...
So that's like a booster?
Exactly. So, and then going forward from that point of time, once we've had a good immune response, animals need to be boosted regularly, typically annually. And so if we can time the timing of that booster, we can take advantage of certain physiological things. For instance, if we're boostering a breeding ewe at around 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing, we know that we're going to have a very, very high antibody level to some of those diseases, and we can take advantage of that and know that it's going to be passaged onto the lamb or lambs through the milk. And so with 5-in-1 vaccine...
So it doesn't go in through while it's still unborn?
Doesn't go through while it's unborn, but it will get passaged onto the lamb within the first really 12 to 24 hours through colostrum, that's right. And so by boostering at the required time with 5-in-1 vaccine, we can ensure that's going to happen. So the typical scenario with breeding ewes is to try and set up a system where they're fully immune and they're boosted about 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing, and then of course we get good protection for tetanus and pulpy kidney carrying through often until the time of weaning, in fact, and sometimes docking and then weaning. If we talk about lamb vaccine, that's a very, very different product. And although it has the typical pulpy kidney type immunity that's induced standardly, as I've just explained, the tetanus protection with lamb vaccine is ready-made. It's ready-made antibody that's been produced actually in a Percheron horse, actually, which they've taken and put into that product, and that will induce immediate immunity, but it's very short-lived. So it's not relying on the lamb itself to produce the immunity. It's giving ready-made antibodies, and they'll hang around and be effective for about 10 to 12 days, for instance. And so
when do you use that then?
Lamb vaccine's given at docking, and typically it'll induce some protection or get well on the way to producing some protection for pulpy kidney. But the big plus is that we're going to get ready-made immunity in an animal that may not be immune if you haven't induced the pre-lambing vaccine of the ewe to tetanus. So we've got a docking wound that's going to not be susceptible to getting infected with tetanus spores.
Of course, because it's an open wound in many cases.
The big thing, though, that people need to be aware is that if lamb vaccine's used and one still wants to look at consolidated and good immunity in that lamb, they're still going to have to go through a regular 2-shot course of 5-in-1 vaccine, because of course the antibody derived for tetanus in particular is only going to hang around for a few days. It's not reliant on the animal's immune system itself, and we've got very limited cover for the other clostridial diseases, so we've only really got a first shot often for pulpy kidney, and as I explained just previous to this, we need 2 shots to induce a good immune response. And so it gets quite technical. And
it does actually. I was sort of sitting here thinking exactly. Wild card, people who are sending off to the processing company lambs straight off the mothers. Okay, so as far as that goes, there is no concern in regard to withholding time with these vaccines. So there's no problem with slaughter. Good, okay, because we just wanted to credibility and traceability and all that sort of stuff. When do you use a 7-in-1? 7-in-1 is a little bit of a it was born on the back of a big outbreak of what was thought to be a disease called Clostridium sordalii, which supposedly killed a lot of very well-grown bulls, Rob. But the whole diagnosis has been put under question. I think the vaccine companies did a great thing. They responded to what the market demanded and what the fear of this disease taking hold. But to be honest, in recent times we're much more suspicious about sordalii
being grown, the bug being grown without being the cause of disease. And actually a lot of us these days are thinking that a lot of those Sordellii deaths in these bulls were actually feed induced, were actually due to bloat. So it's a little bit very suspicious.
Wee bit knee-jerk, but it was a good idea to cover it.
Absolutely. And we also have leptospirosis involved in some of these 7-in-1 vaccines. Lepto typically is a dairy cow related disease, and so I guess it's a good inducement to try and incorporate a wider range of immunity in dairy cows. And let's face it, I mean, you can lose one cow from a clostridial disease, and it's going to more than cover your vaccine costs for the next decade. Let's say.
Even at the moment, those cows are still very, very valuable. Dairy cattle, do we worry about? I mean, beef cattle.
Beef and dairy cattle, as I said, it's clostridial diseases typically hit the headlines and hit everyone's sort of brain function when we're thinking about sheep farming and lamb farming, particularly with pulpy kidney, for instance, and losing lambs with wounds to the head and things from fighting. But it does occur in cattle. We do get losses in cattle from pulpy kidney and from blood poisoning and black disease, which is a nasty clostridial disease which is set up by following intramuscular injections or bruises and wounds to the musculature. And although it's not typically common, we do see outbreaks from time to time. And even if it's a sporadic loss of one animal, as I've just said, you can vaccinate for a decade, and it's more than going to cover the cost efficiencies of even not losing one animal. So
exactly. So it's prevention rather than cure.
Absolutely.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. In just a moment, we'll be talking irrigation. Tony, winter's looming. What should we be doing?
Yeah, it's certainly cooling off, and there's going to be a few frosts. I mean, from an irrigation point of view with the K-line, probably time to kick them against the fence and keep them out of harm's way for the winter. If you've got ball valves on your system, probably pay to have them half open. Either open, fully open or fully closed. They're going to split in the frost, so whilst we'd love to sell you some more in the spring, it'd be best to avoid that.
So the secret is that you sort of just quietly crack them, you don't leave them wide open or closed?
Not fully open, not fully closed.
Tony, do the pipes handle the frost?
The polyethylene pipes all handle the frost quite comfortably, really. So nothing to really worry about that. I wouldn't disconnect them as such, because then vermin and rubbish gets in them and you've got to flush them out again in the spring. So keep them capped, but and preferably not pressurised.
Yeah, you said to kick them underneath the trees. Do you put them on the sunny side?
It doesn't really matter. No, they're quite comfortable wherever. So no, just out of the road somewhere.
They say, Tony, that the best time to plant a tree is either 20 years ago or today. Is the same to be said for irrigation?
Absolutely. I mean, we look at a lot of the older schemes about and marvel at how cheap they went in, but in their day I'm sure they were quite expensive, and today's definitely the cheapest day to start planning and looking at your irrigation's requirements for the future. It's never going to get any cheaper.
Now, people are converting into irrigation. There's obviously a bit of a lead time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now is the time to start looking. If you're expecting to irrigate next spring, it's quite a process, and the consent process is fraught with hurdles, and then even the design side to get the right result, or the thing, it doesn't want to be rushed. You want to look at the options, and there are cheaper ways of doing the job. You don't want to rush it and just take the first example that's given to you.
What about modifying existing schemes or whatever you've got and you're using on your farm?
It really does pay today to look at your efficiencies and particularly running costs. you shouldn't be running at a higher pressure than you need to. That's just burning more energy. And there are some significant savings to be had from probably tidying up what you've got.
Once again, some very, very good advice. After the break, an opportunity for you to learn how to save $3 million by being careful.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
I think it's all working well, Jack.
My thoughts exactly.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
This is exactly what you need.
I think that'll do the trick.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
It's all looking good. Did you bring the sauce?
I can't think of everything.
We'll get you thinking, think water.
For real ideas and real solutions, just think water.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
Dave, $3 million if you're not careful, that's a lot of money. Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, it's a scary figure, isn't it, Rob? It's the reality of the new reform bill. It's one of the, well, I suppose the highest fine that a company can acquire in the event that they are deemed to be not as efficient at the health and safety protocols on the farm. So if an inspector comes in after an accident and it goes to the district court, then potentially that's the fine. That could be the fine to a company or a body corporate.
I want to clarify who takes that case to the court. It's not a victim's family or victim's support people. It is the government, for the want of a better term.
Correct. So WorkSafe New Zealand, this is part of their portfolio, for want of a better term. So they are responsible for ensuring, well, literally the health and safety of all employees and workers on farms and other businesses around New Zealand. Farming is obviously in the gun a little bit because of the sadly because of the safety record we've got at the moment,
the
with accidents and so on. Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, it's an open book as far as disaster is concerned. You've got people on four-wheel motorbikes, you've got people on two-wheel motorbikes, you've got stock that will kick, bite, and goodness knows what else. I mean, bites at one end and kicks at the other.
Yeah, there's a lot of kicking and biting going on farm. Look, you know, the reality is it's a dangerous environment. You know, farming is not, I mean, you can, best practice, of course, you can mitigate the potential for an accident. And that's what most farmers out there in New Zealand are doing right now. I have yet to meet a farmer who doesn't care about their staff. But accidents do happen, just like in any workplace. And in farming, as we know, there's hill country and there's even flat land. There's the opportunity to have an accident, whether it be on the quad bike or driving stock or just working with machinery and plant. It can be as simple as that. So,
but Dave, there's got to be more to it than just people visiting the farm signing out indemnity and saying, yes, I have seen what's been written about safety here?
Yeah, so there's a number of issues that that farm owners and business owners need to look at. One of them is their duty of care across the whole spectrum of their operation. So the person in charge of the farm, the team manager, the milking managers and so on, they're as equally responsible. In the old days, it really kind of fell back to the farm owner, and the ACC sort of picked the tab up. Well, that's changed now. The reality is the farmer, the team manager, the team leader, the milking manager, the guy driving who's in charge of all the harvesters or whatever the case may be, they're all responsible. And we're talking some fairly hefty penalties if those managers or supervisors aren't seen to be proactive in the way they disperse the safety equipment, or making sure that the staff members are fully enlightened as to how the safety protocols should work within that environment, i.e., harvesting or milking or whatever.
So basically, it's like justice has got to be seen to be done, as it were.
Exactly. So the duty of care really falls back onto a number of different people now. It used to kind of just be the farm owner or the manager, the farm owner. Now it does fall down the layers, the levels. They call it the PCBU, the person conducting business and understanding. I don't know why they just didn't call it the manager, but that's
well, it's far too simple.
Exactly, we don't want it too simple. But the reality is, yes, those PCBUs, those owners are now fully responsible. So that now comes back into the district court, and the district court can now mandate that the owner has remedial action, has more training, fines can be allocated, prison terms can be sentenced, dished out. So yeah, there's a whole raft of new things that are going to affect the farming operation. So it's really important that farmers get their head around that. Don't wait till the tractor's empty of diesel. Put diesel in it before it runs out. And in this case, it's all about farm safety, ensuring that you've got SOPs in place, standard operating procedures.
I was going to say thank you.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you what that meant.
Standard operating procedures. You've got a good health and safety program in place. You've recruited the right people to write those protocols for you. And,
now, this is the bit that gets me, the writing of these protocols. Now, whose responsibility is it for the staff members and visitors to that property to work within those protocols?
Okay, so it comes back to the manager. The manager, the person operating, who's in charge of that farm or that operation at that time. Doesn't matter whether you're a harvesting contractor, silage, milking, dry stock, it doesn't matter. If you're in charge of human lives, you are responsible for them. So it's up to you to ensure that you're fully trained and fully aware of your responsibilities, your limitations, and also make sure that your team members are adhering to those protocols, whether it be making sure they're wearing helmets, they've got high vis, they've got protective gear if they're using chainsaws or other equipment. It's fully on you to ensure that those things are carried out.
But how can you stop somebody rolling a ute off a farm track going up a hill that's very, very steep?
Well, you can't really. I mean, that comes back to a bit of training as well. We don't send the boy up a hill block who's never ridden a quad bike or a tractor before. We make sure that that person has been fully trained in the practices of driving, whether it be a quad bike or a tractor or a four-wheel drive. Those are basic things, and I think most farmers do that as a matter of course. But there was a sad case not so long ago of a 14-year-old boy who drowned, who got pinned under his quad bike. I think it was about 3 months ago, and he was drowned. Now, the kid was safe. He was riding very safely, and it was flatland dairy. He was just bringing some milk cows in. It was dark, and he rolled the bike into a 2-foot ditch and drowned himself. Now, the terrible tragedy of that was that kid wasn't being silly. He wasn't doing anything wrong, really. He just didn't see the ditch. Bike flipped upside down and pinned him under it. I suppose what I'm trying to say, things can happen very quickly, and we need to be able to get put in place things that can help mitigate those, or at least ensure that we get to those people in good time.
That's where you come in with your two-way radios.
Well, yeah, look, they're not going to stop accidents. There's no two ways about it. But if in the event of an accident, yes, it would be a lot better to know that there was an accident than not know there was an accident. If someone needs help, you know, you push a button and you get that response, and that's what two-way radio comms are all about. So yeah, absolutely. There are occasions where it won't save a life, but you know, it can help. I could say it can help speed up the process of finding that person or getting to that person.
Yeah, because they can't always get to a cell phone, or there may not be cell phone coverage.
In a lot of cases there isn't. You know, look, we do this every day of the week, putting repeaters and radios on farms, and look, I think it's fair to say that most modern farming practices today is all about talking to each other, whether it be just for the health and safety, also just knowing exactly where everyone is and saving money.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave.
You're most welcome.
And if you want to catch Dave's interview again, it's on our website, which is ontheland.co.nz. And the other thing is, we will be meeting all the other finalists, the Young Farmer of the Year, over the next few weeks. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you have just missed On the Land, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.